Chan. We begin tonight with breaking news. The rent, it is going up. There were chants of freeze the rent, but that did not stop the city's rent guidelines board from raising the rent for rent-stabilized buildings.
Yeah, Pix 7's Eileen LaPalmer joins us now live in East Harlem with the very latest on this. Eileen.
The vote happening in under an hour, and when it was done, it means that rent is going up 3% for one-year leases and 4.5% for two-year leases in rent-stabilized building. It's both landlords and tenants who were here were protesting it.
There's so much more stuff that's scammy right off the top.
Corey Crockett has rented in Manhattan before, but he says this time it's been nearly impossible. He says in one day, 3 scammers have tried unsuccessfully to rip him off.
They want an application and security deposit before even seeing the place, which to me is like, oh, well, then there's no place, huh?
Crockett wants to warn others because he says all 3 of these close calls originated on legitimate websites like Redfin and StreetEasy.
A lot of these were like rushing me to apply, where they would say, you can see the apartment this weekend.
The suspicious StreetEasy post showed this Lincoln Center apartment for rent for $2,000 per month. The picture had a phone number across it saying text first rather than emailing the agent. He did both, and the text started first, trying to get him to give all sorts of personal information. The legitimate real estate agent whose email was used in the post then responded, warning him it was a fraud.
I was shocked at how much of this was out there compared to last time.
Unfortunately, I have noticed a large increase in scams throughout the city.
Robert Swiderski, the owner of Real Integrity in Sunnyside, Queens, says Crockett was right not to give too much personal information or any money up front before seeing the actual apartment.
The only information I would share with somebody up front is your name and your income information. Everything else can be filled out in an application after you view the apartment.
As for Crockett, he contacted StreetEasy, who removed the listing. A spokesman for StreetEasy said in part, "We have comprehensive systems in place to prevent fraudulent listings and suspicious behavior and to keep user information safe. Our teams monitor activity in many different ways."
Looking for an apartment is really stressful in New York right now, and so this just adds on to the stress.
Redfin did not respond to our request for comment, but both Redfin and StreetEasy have tips on their website warning people about potential rental scams. And Swiderski with Real Integrity that we spoke to said one more note: don't ever give a deposit after a virtual tour only, because of course that can be faked also. We are here on the Upper East Side. Eileen LaPalmer, Pix 11 News.
7:35 right now. A rare move by New York City's Rent Guidelines Board could lead to a reprieve for 2 million people living in rent-stabilized apartments.
Yeah, the board is now set to vote next month on lowering rent increases for the 2-year leases. Public Advocate Jumaane Williams welcomes the move but continues to call for a rent freeze. And Public Advocate is joining us this morning to explain his position. So good to see you, Mr. Williams.
Good morning. Good morning. So
let's talk about this. It's a revote, right, by the Rent Guidelines Board. It's a promising sign. It's rare that they actually go about with these revotes. But can you explain what exactly the 1% means, right? Shaving off 1% and how that would kind of still average out for the renter?
You know, I think it's a move. You have to say a good move, but it's by degree and not a big degree. And so the top charge can still have renters paying almost $250 extra a month. That's $3,000. Where are people going to find that money? The wages are not keeping up. So we're still really quite concerned about the change, and we're quite concerned about the range that they set. So they make it seem like they do something great if they go on the lower end. The fact of the matter is people can't afford $150 extra a month. And that's part of the problem. We may be facing the third highest rent increase in Eric Adams' Rent Guidelines Board in the past 20-something years. And this is a huge problem, increasing homelessness and housing stability for folks.
Yeah, and on the other side of that, though, what do you say to the landlords, though? The landlords we spoke with say they need between a 6 and 7% increase to keep up with rising costs.
So what often happens...
Our property tax bills go up 8% or more year over year. The Water Board is currently voting on a 3.7% water increase. We're seeing Con Ed raise their rates by 11%, proposing another increase next year. The process itself is unfortunately broken.
Sorry, I didn't mean to give that abrupt soundbite, but how do you respond to the landlords?
Oh, no problem. There are landlords that need assistance. What often happens is they'll put some of the landlords, particularly the smaller owners, in the front because they're both most sympathetic stories. They're all the larger landlords who don't need that type of assistance. And there are two things. One, we have to get government to step in because tenants literally can't have the burden of trying to fix all of the problems. The landlords go to the tenants where the tenants go to. You can't squeeze money out of them, so you increase the homelessness. What we have been pushing for a long time is to have separate conversations so that everybody's not painted with a broad brush. But if you're going to do that, you cannot keep raising the rents of people who can't afford it. And I will add this, we have seen an increase in rent, but not a better housing stock. And so that means the housing stock is getting worse, even as the rents are going up. So let's split and have different conversations and also have government step in to assist those landlords who need this assistance.
So why hasn't that happened yet?
Well, up until now, this is the first time I've heard one of the landlord organizations agree that we may need a separate conversation. But they've always rejected that conversation. They've always rejected, let's have a separate conversation, because I think they like the opportunity to have the more sympathetic funds, the folks in the front. Also, the state has to step in because it's governed by some of the state laws.
Yeah.
But what happens is everybody points to each other and say, we can help. And in a silo, we're harming New York.
So I spoke to the head of the tenant association, right? And he was telling me about how some of these buildings are just so in disrepair because they can't keep up with the demands. Now, I know you have that worst landlord list, right? And then they're afraid that they end up on it because they can't make the repairs. So what do you say to the folks? I know you're talking about the sympathetic ones, and there's some folks who are looking to make money off of this altogether. But the buildings are in such bad shape. Is what you're proposing just the better solution? Like, would it work to fix the buildings?
We absolutely need government to step in if there are buildings in total disrepair, like your suggestion. But I would say the vast majority of folks who get on our list, it's not because the rents weren't enough. It's because they made decisions to try to capture as much money as possible.
Okay.
But we do want to make sure that we're assisting the buildings who need assistance. But what we've learned is you just can't ask tenants to pay $300 more. They will end up homeless. They will end up housing unstable, and that's not helpful for anyone.
All right. And again, the final vote's on June 25th. Quickly, are there public hearings before that?
I think there are some more hearings. There definitely is a final vote.
Okay.
We're going to obviously be there and ask people to be there as well. But I want to say it's not if everybody's unhappy, we did a good thing. It's not. Because what we've been doing is increasing homelessness and the housing stock is getting worse.
Okay. We want to move on quickly to congestion pricing, which lives to see another day. Here we go again, a deja vu. After a federal judge, though, blocked the Trump administration's move to kill the toll. So you did a 5-borough transit tour yesterday. What did you hear from commuters?
We did. And one, people don't want the federal government, Donald Trump, taking money from the transit system. That is the biggest takeaway that we heard. We also put out a report that showed that, congestion pricing, one, is actually gaining in popularity, and two, it's actually working. We do want to see some tweaks, and that's important, but it is working. And people don't want Donald Trump stopping money from coming into the transit system.
What kind of tweaks?
One, we want to make sure that lower income New Yorkers are getting a better assistance. There are some places like the Queensboro Bridge where people are being unnecessarily tolled. So we want to see some of those things changed. But people in the system were very clear about the unreliability. That is the biggest issue, whether it is trains that are coming late, buses that are bunched together, or maintenance that seems to be eternal and never ending. And funding can assist those things. And they don't want Donald Trump holding our transit system hostage for decisions that we made locally. And that funding can really help with those things. We did hear some conversations about security. That was probably the second thing that we heard. But the number one thing was reliability. So
this ruling is temporary, though. So quickly, what happens next?
Well, we know that they legally cannot force anyone to stop this. But what they can do is try to hold us hostage to take money that will make the system better. That makes no sense at all. And that's what we heard from people who were in that system. We took the ferry, we took City Bike, we took the train, and we took the bus. And so we have to keep standing tall. And I'm glad to see the MTA took Donald Trump and the federal government to court. We have to keep going to court. We have to keep holding strong because we're winning. They're actually wrong. Holding money from the transit system does not make it better. It would only make it worse.
Got to leave it there. Public Advocate Jumaane Williams, thank you for your time. I know you're not feeling that great, so feel better, okay?
Appreciate it. Hopefully the Knicks make me feel better in the next game.
Yes, please. From your lips to God's ears. Thank you.
All right, 7:42, everybody.
This is Picks on Politics Daily with Dan Manarino.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Pop Daily. I'm Dan Manarino. It is Thursday, and that would be May 29th. Had to check my calendar, make sure I got the day right. A big night tonight on Pix 11, okay? It is the first time ever that Pix 11 has been selected by the Campaign Finance Board to host a live citywide debate. It's the first in all of the debates, so we are honored to have been selected, and we'll be bringing you the Race for City Comptroller debate tonight, 7 to 8 p.m. here on Pix 11 between Mark Levine, the Manhattan Borough President, and City Council Member Justin Brandon, who's the finance chair of the city council. The two of them going head-to-head in the race for comptroller. Myself and Henry Rossoff moderating that debate with a number of sponsors, including 1010 Wins, 94.7 The Block, and Schneps Media. So we're looking forward to bringing you that tonight, 7 to 8 p.m., as well as a pre-show from 6:30 to 7 p.m., where we'll take a closer look at the two candidates that will be on the debate stage. So there's a lot to talk about, including the topic of affordability, which we'll cover in the debate tonight as well. And part of that conversation of affordability is just the cost to live in New York City, right? And there's been this whole conversation once again about rent freezes for the rent-stabilized apartments. And this happens almost every single year. We talk about the Rent Guidelines Board, whether there's going to be an increase or not. And for the first time ever, we kind of saw the Rent Guidelines Board put out a proposal and then said we're going to revote on it and bring some of the numbers down. But the range is still there. So it currently is 3.75 to 7.75 for two-year leases, that it could potentially go up. So what does that look like, right? We're going to talk to the housing chair, the city council member now, City Councilwoman Parina Sanchez, about this, right? So great to have you here, council member. Great to see you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dan.
So we talked about this at length with the public advocate, Jumaane Williams, right, who was calling for a rent freeze. A number of mayoral candidates are calling for a rent freeze. Where do you stand on the issue of a rent freeze versus seeing some sort of increase with the Rent Guidelines Board?
Sure. I mean, ever since Eric Adams took office, the Rent Guidelines Board has voted year after year after year to not just increase rents for rent-stabilized apartments, but to significantly increase rents for rent-stabilized apartments. So I am on board. I am supporting the rent freeze ask and call this year, because the truth of the matter is that, yes, inflation has gone up, costs have gone up, and that affects the housing market, that affects landlords, but it has affected tenants more, right? We're looking at and we're talking about the lowest income New Yorkers, who are 40% of them are living in these apartments. And so when you put up rent 5, 6, 7%, as we've seen in the recent years, that's really hurting New Yorkers.
Yeah, and so when you first heard of the numbers, right, I think it was 4.75, right? That's what it started at, to 7.75. That was the initial range. And I know a lot of folks, including yourself, came out and said that's just way too much. Then they came and said we're going to revote. Which happened this week, and they drop it to 3.75, but still that range of 7.75 increases for two-year leases. Did that help? What did you make of the change?
It's very minor. It doesn't not help, right? It's very minor, but ultimately we don't know what the Rent Guidelines Board is going to do, because as you said, this is a range, and they have a final vote that's coming at the end of June, and that's when we'll really know how much they're going to be increasing rents. And it's just really. I represent one of the lowest income districts in the city of New York, right? When folks are walking into the office and they're asking me for help, I feel like I have, I'm handcuffed, right? There's not much I can do, because we have an administration that is not offering more vouchers. We have a federal administration that's cutting the back. We have rents that are going up in stabilized and forget the market rate apartments, right? And so this is one of the few areas that we were really hoping for some respite to control rent prices in the city of New York.
So when you look at it then, right, and you look at the flip side of it, and so this is what I was talking to the public advocate, Jumaane Williams, about, that some of the landlords, and we spoke to the Landlords Association here on Pop Daily, who were saying, we need the increase. We just need the increase to make repairs to a building, right? So what's the solution, I guess, if you don't raise the rent? And if there is a rent, well, obviously there's not going to be a rent freeze because they're proposing some kind of increase. But they're still saying with that, they can't keep up with the demands of a building. So what's the solution?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So this becomes a question of whose back does it fall on, right? Whose back does it fall on? Do we put it on the lowest income New Yorkers who are living and struggling to pay the rent? The RGB's own study, the Rent Guidelines Board own study, showed that 13% of households this year fell behind on their rent, right? So do we put it on their backs or do we find another way? And so as the buildings chair, the housing and buildings chair in the city council, I've been at the forefront of fighting for everyone, right? We want a stable housing market in the city of New York. That means trying to stabilize rents, hold those prices steady, and figure out ways to support landlords. So what does that look like? We passed J51 in the city council. That offers, that can be up to $100,000 to $300,000 for a building to upgrade their systems, their electrical, their facades, right? Issues that older buildings have. We also passed when we passed the City of Yes zoning text amendment, which was very controversial a few months ago, we also put in a lot more capital subsidy dollars to go to fixing older buildings, right? And so these are just a few examples. The state has also been putting in money. These are examples of the ways that government is trying to step in so that the answer to whose backs do we do it on is not the lowest New Yorkers, but it's government stepping in.
So with that, right, how much potential, is that definite that they would get the money? I'm trying to figure out why a landlord would know that they're getting that money and then still say, well, we don't have enough.
Yeah, so they're definitely getting this money. J51 is going to help them to do things like comply with local law 97. So they're definitely getting that money. It's money over the long term, right? So J51, for example, comes in the form of a tax abatement. So instead of your tax bills being a couple $1 million a year, you're going to see a really big reduction that is supposed to go and help you to make ends meet for your building.
Yeah. Okay. Because when you look at it, right? I mean, I'm sure you know this. The argument from the landlord's perspective is property tax bills went up 8% or more over a year. The water board's currently voting on a nearly 4% water increase. Con Ed raising their rates by 11%. So they're saying when you add kind of all of it up, they're like, we're just kind of, we're drowning underwater. And even with a 7% increase, if it were to go that high, they still said that they don't have enough. But at the same time, what the public advocate was saying, and maybe you can speak to this more too, is that if you raise the rent even $250, right, that it's going to force somebody to have to move out.
Exactly. That's the point, right? Same question. It goes back to the same question: whose back does it fall on? Yeah. And so if we're talking about pushing somebody who's already close to the brink, pushing them past the brink, that really hurts. And I always want to highlight this: the Rent Guidelines Board, they have amazing analysts who work there. They look at all the data. They look at landlord expenses. They look at housing cost of living in the city of New York. They do all of this work. They're still showing that rent stabilized apartments, like, not looking at the full universe, but rent stabilized apartments are still profiting. They're still in the black, if you will. They're not in the red as a category. And so that's not true for tenants, right? The tenants are facing eviction. They're falling behind on their rent. Yeah. We see housing courts backed up. And by the way, landlords don't want this. Landlords don't want to take tenants to housing courts, because then they languish for a year, maybe 2 years, because the courts are so backed up. And so how about we try to keep rent stable, try to keep people in their homes? And I'm saying, let's bring city FEPS vouchers. The city council has passed legislation to expand access to those. We're fighting it out with the Adams administration, but that would go a long way to make sure that the landlords are receiving rent, and they're receiving stable rent for these apartments that they have, so they can upkeep the buildings.
What happens now, right? Obviously, it goes to the full vote for the Rent Guidelines Board, where they are going to vote on some kind of increase potentially with public input.
Yeah, that's right. And the thing is that every year this is happening at the same time as the New York City budget, right? So at the same time that they are deciding how much, we won't stop calling for rent freeze. Let me make that clear, right? Yeah. I will continue to call for that. So I know a lot of my elected colleagues, but at the same time that they are deciding what the ultimate number will be as the appointed board members by Eric Adams, by the mayor, we are negotiating the budget. And so that's where we will continue this fight. How much do we have for vouchers? How are we stabilizing the holes that the federal administration, the Trump administration, is putting into our budget? And how are we, future-proofing the city of New York by building more and preserving more housing so that we try to dig ourselves out of this situation?
All right. Keep us posted. Obviously, it's an important matter that we want to keep on top of. So when the vote does happen, I want to have you back on to kind of talk about whatever the impact is of whatever the decision is. It's a big unknown at this time. Awesome. Okay.
Thank you
Good
so
stuff.
much for having me.
Good to see you. Thank you for always making time for us. Appreciate you. All right, everybody. And don't forget, tonight, big night here on Pix 11. Like I said, we're going to be hosting that debate in just a matter of hours from now. 6:30 p.m. is our pre-show. 7 p.m. we go live with the debate between Mark Levine and Justin Brannan going head-to-head in the race for New York City Comptroller. The results of our poll also going to have been released at that point, so you'll see who's ahead in our poll. But all of that happening tonight, 7 p.m. here on Pix 11. I'll see you there.
Chan, we begin tonight with breaking news. The rent, it is going up. There were chants of freeze the rent, but that did not stop the city's rent guidelines board from raising the rent for rent-stabilized buildings.
Yeah, Pix 7's Eileen LaPalmer joins us now live in East Harlem with the very latest on this. Eileen.
The vote happening in under an hour, and when it was done, it means that rent is going up 3% for one-year leases and 4.5% for two-year leases in rent-stabilized building. It's both landlords and tenants who were here were protesting it.
Hotel order number 55.
The chanting rarely stopped as the Rent Guidelines Board voted to raise the rent for the city's 1 million rent-stabilized units. During a meeting that lasted about a half hour, the board voted 5-4 to raise the rent 3% on one-year leases and 4.5% on two-year leases in rent-stabilized units. One of the tenant members on the guidelines board voiced his opposition from the stage before the vote.
Let me repeat, this is not normal. When you see human suffering, it is not normal to take actions and directly add to their suffering.
But landlords of small buildings say a 3% increase over a year does not keep up with their costs.
Con Edison over 11% for electric, close to 13% for gas, and the water and sewer is going up tomorrow 4%.
Tenant Esteban said $999 for his Crown Heights one-bedroom is already too much.
It's going to have to come from somewhere. It's going to have to come from food. It's going to have to come from medicine. It's going to have to come from incidental expenses. And it's not something that we should have to do. Not when landlord profits are going up and our salaries are not.
Housing is a human right. Fight.
Tenants and tenant advocates called for a rent freeze, but some knew going in it wasn't going to happen.
The public members don't represent the public. Do they live in rent-regulated apartments? No, they don't. Some of them are lawyers. They're various. They may not be landlords themselves, but they are on the side of the landlords.
And in the end, both sides walked away unhappy.
Really sad, but also it was kind of what to expect from this board. This board has shown over the years that they are in the business of seeing the landlords profit.
I'm not surprised. I mean, the board has continually ignored the math and defunded and underfunded these buildings.
And those rent increases go into effect on October 1st of this year. We are live here in East Harlem. Eileen LaPalmer, Pix 11 News.
Ernie, only about 10% of the more than 5,000 apartments in this development will be exempt from those rent increases for a variety of reasons, whether it's seniors who are living there or they're eligible for another program. Everyone else, effective November 1st, is going to see steep rent increases in the hundreds of dollars.
I was paying $977. Now my rent went to $1,300.
Anthony, one of the 20,000 residents living in the sprawling Rochdale Village state-regulated Mitchell-Lama co-op development. All of them set to see rent increases of $227 to $486 a month, depending on the size of the unit, effective November 1st.
I'm on a fixed income.
Pix 11 News was here back in May when residents initially accused Summit Building Management of mismanaging funds. We heard more of the same when we returned Wednesday.
It's not fair.
Gary Wilson says many residents were aware the co-op's finances were in bad shape and rent increases were a possibility, but did not know they would be this high and come so soon.
and it was a short time notice, which was not fair to any resident here.
But Jay Williams, president of Rochdale Village's management company, fiercely rejects those claims and says residents were warned of the looming rent hikes as far back as March through reports and newsletters he forwarded to Pix 11 News.
Expenses continue to rise, which again causes a shortfall in income, which means you don't have enough to pay. And the only real mechanism that co-ops really have is through carrying charge increases.
Despite receiving more than $30 million in state aid, Williams says the development is out of options, citing soaring operational costs that include spiking insurance premiums and a $17 million past due water bill. Officials in Albany tell me that the state has a very limited role in the day-to-day management of privately owned Mitchell-Lama housing, adding that these developments are required by law to cover their operating expenses. We're live in Queens this evening. Jay Dow, Pix 11 News.
Let's give us some hot chocolate. Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani handed out hot chocolate while doubling down on his promise to freeze the rent. It's an important promise in this part of town, which includes thousands of units of rent-stabilized housing at Stuytown. Following the hot chocolate, Mamdani gave a press conference where he addressed recent hot topics, including if current Mayor Eric Adams would block his rent freeze promise by packing the Rent Guidelines Board on the way out the door. Have you been able to convince him not to make any actions like that would thwart your housing agenda?
We did not have that conversation. I am continuing to be confident, however, of our ability to fulfill the promise we've made to freeze the rent for more than 2 million rent-stabilized tenants.
Shifting gears to recent protesting of immigration raids, the NYPD's response to it, and allegations that the police department is not completely following sanctuary city laws, Mamdani says there must be no cooperation between the NYPD and ICE. And protesting, he says, is an absolute right in the city. Mamdani says NYPD must strike the right balance.
I think the NYPD's job is to keep order, but it's not to assist immigration agents in the work that they are doing. It's to protect New Yorkers.
Mamdani also addressed recent reports that the brother of Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch called Mamdani a, quote, enemy of Jewish people at a charity event.
The commissioner apologized to my team for those remarks, and I look forward to being a mayor for each and every New Yorker, including Jewish New Yorkers.
Number of other items that came up. Mamdani said he would stop the homeless encampment sweeps that Mayor Adams notably really started and put into overdrive since very early in his time in office. He also maintains that the NYPD staffing level headcount would stay at 35,000. And yes, that does mean hiring cops to get there if necessary. Currently, we're about 1,000 short of that number. Live in Manhattan, Henry Rossoff, Pix 11 News.
Going to be called rental ripoff hearings, and they're going to be held across the 5 boroughs in the next 100 days, the first 100 days of Mayor Mamdani's administration, a chance for tenants to voice all their complaints. Now, the mayor made the announcement this morning at a news conference up in the Bronx, and he says it's going to be the way for him to understand what are the issues involving tenants and landlords, and if there's a way to introduce relevant policy to improve the situation and make more affordable housing in the city. Now, at the same news conference, the new mayor announced the appointment of Dina Levy. She'll be head of the City Department of Housing, Preservation, and Development. She has a very long history with tenants. She previously or currently works for the State Department of Homes and Community Renewal.
Let this moment be evidence of what our new future will look like. A city where New Yorkers can turn to their leaders and see that they now have champions who care about them, listen to them, and wake up every morning honored to work for them.
And I do know that the work ahead will be hard. We will need to increase the resources to build more affordable housing. We will need to try new, innovative, and sometimes scary innovations in order to overcome this crisis. And in many respects, we will need to embrace a willingness to rethink how we do business.
And Pix 11 spoke to several tenants walking by. They're asking why we're here. I say there's going to be a series of hearings if they have any complaints about their landlords. And of course, you know they do. We are live on the Lower East Side. McGee Hickey, Pix 11 News.
When I first moved in, figuring out that it was rent stabilized, I had to do all that work myself.
Bushwick resident Tykeira Pride has spent nearly 6 years living in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and she knows firsthand how confusing the city's rent system can be.
Contacting DHCR, getting the rent history in the mail, all of that took weeks and months of time that my landlords never thought to share with me.
Pride eventually learned she'd been overpaying for her apartment. The process taught her how hidden and complicated rent information can be for tenants. That's why she supports the city's new Rent Transparency Act, which takes effect January 23rd. The law, led by City Council member Sandy Nurse, will require buildings with rent-stabilized units to post clear signs in English and Spanish showing their status on how tenants can look up their rent histories.
When tenants don't know if they're in a rent-stabilized building or in a rent-stabilized apartment, landlords often overcharge them, harass them, eventually kick them out, and then jack up the rent for the next tenant.
Nurse says the goal is to stop those patterns before they start and to make rent information clear the moment someone moves in.
We've lost over 130,000 rent-stabilized units, and that could be from them just coming out of the rent stabilization program, or most likely bad landlords who are harassing tenants. This is an opportunity to empower tenants with information, help them make sure they keep their rent low, and make sure they're not being charged an illegal rent.
She says that the signs in building lobbies are just one step toward empowering tenants citywide with the knowledge they need to stay in their homes. The new law is drawn from the state's rent registration database for that unit and covers every year the landlord registered the rent. For Pride, if this law had been in place when she moved in, it could have spared her months of confusion. And today, it represents more than clarity. It represents protection.
There can be a lot of shady things when it comes to landlords and transparency, and I think just having this information posted for everybody's knowledge will just save a lot of people, like I said, time, energy, and stress and money.
In Bushwick, Brooklyn, Corey McGinnis, Pix 11 News.
If these walls could talk.
I don't have money to eat, almost.
They tell you the stories of renters navigating a tough market.
The Bronx is becoming they're having a lot of new buildings coming up, and they claim that they're affordable, but a lot of my friends say they're not.
Honestly, everything's just going up, man. It's daily life here is going it's very hard to live in New York City now.
A report from real estate company Douglas Elliman breaking down December 2025 prices puts the wallet crush into context.
We ended the year 2025 with record high numbers. We didn't see the traditional dip in the winter, which we're used to seeing.
In Manhattan, median rental prices surged 8.9% from the same time last year to about $4,700. In Brooklyn, prices climbed 10.2% to about $3,800. And in Queens, prices jumped 7.6% to about $3,600.
And people are paying it. I think that's what's most remarkable is I'm still seeing bidding wars. I'm seeing lines out the door at my listings.
Real estate agent Jenna Raskoff says at the same time, listing inventory remains low.
I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've never seen so many tenants renew their lease, which is creating even more demand for tenants who are looking. There's just very limited product with only 3%, if not slightly lower than 3% vacancy.
Mayor Zohran Mamdani talking affordability Tuesday on ABC's The View.
Landlords are making 12% increase in their revenues. Tenants, median household income, $60,000.
Reiterating a campaign cornerstone to freeze rent for all stabilized tenants.
You can do that. That's what the Rent Guidelines Board can do, and we appoint every member to that board.
It'll be interesting to see how freezing rent and all of the things that he has on the docket maybe inversely or positively, reflect in the market.